The sleek hull of the human diplomatic vessel, the HSS Endeavour, sliced through the iridescent nebula surrounding the Galactic Council's space station. Chancellor Andrew Thurman stood at the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the approaching alien megastructure. The station's crystalline spires and swooping arches dwarfed the Endeavour, a stark reminder of humanity's relative infancy in the galactic community. Thurman's jaw tightened as he turned to address his team. The air crackled with tension, a palpable weight pressing down on each member of the human delegation. They all knew the stakes. This closed-door session could determine humanity's future among the stars. As the Endeavour docked, Thurman led his team through the airlock. The station's atmosphere hit them like a wall, alien scents, sounds, and gravity subtly off from Earth normal. Security Chief Elena Rodriguez's hand instinctively twitched towards her concealed sidearm, a movement Thurman caught with a subtle shake of his head. They were here as guests, not combatants. The Council's reception chamber was a masterpiece of alien architecture. Swirling holograms depicted star systems and trade routes, while delegates from a dozen species conversed in hushed tones. Thurman's gaze swept the room, cataloging potential allies and adversaries. The Zarthalian ambassador, all tentacles and bioluminescent patches, pulsed with what Thurman had learned to recognize as curiosity. The Krathi representative, by contrast, exuded waves of barely concealed hostility from beneath layers of chitinous armor. As Thurman stepped forward to greet the Council's high speaker, a tremor ran through the station. Conversations faltered, antennae twitched, and compound eyes swiveled in confusion. Then, chaos erupted. The station's klaxons blared to life, bathing the chamber in pulsing red light. A deafening explosion rocked the structure, sending delegates sprawling. Thurman's military training kicked in as he shouted orders to his team, urging them to take cover behind the chamber's ornate pillars. Through the viewport, Thurman watched in horror as a swarm of gleaming, predatory ships materialized from stealth. Their energy weapons lashed out, carving glowing furrows across the station's hull. The Council's defensive grid sputtered to life, but huge sections remained dark and unresponsive. "It's a coordinated strike," Rodriguez hissed, her eyes wild. "They knew exactly where to hit us." Thurman's mind raced. The closed nature of this session, the precision of the attack, it reeked of an inside job. But there was no time to untangle that web of treachery, not when they were fish in a barrel. Across the chamber, the high speaker's translator crackled to life, urging calm in a dozen languages. It was drowned out by the panicked shrieks of delegates and the groaning of the station's stressed superstructure. Thurman locked eyes with a Meridian diplomat, its segmented body coiled in terror. In that moment, rank and species meant nothing. They were all potential casualties. Thurman barked orders into his comm unit, trying to raise the Endeavour. Static answered him. He cursed, realizing the attackers must be jamming communications. Around him, other delegates were having similar realizations, their faces contorting in alien expressions of desperation. Another blast rocked the station. Emergency force fields flickered into existence, barely containing hull breaches. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, sending furniture and unprepared delegates alike tumbling through the air. Through it all, Thurman's mind whirred. They needed to get a distress call out to alert Earth and their allies. But how? His gaze settled on the station's central computer terminal, miraculously still operational. If they could bypass the jamming. "Rodriguez! Patel, with me!" Thurman shouted, already sprinting towards the console. His security chief and communications officer fell in behind him, dodging panicked aliens and falling debris. Patel's fingers flew across the alien interface, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The jamming's coming from inside the station," he reported grimly. "I can't break through." Thurman's mouth set in a hard line. They needed a direct link to their ship, a way to punch through the electronic fog. His eyes settled on a maintenance hatch near the floor. It was a long shot, but... "Rodriguez, cover us. Patel, help me with this panel." As they worked to pry open the hatch, the sounds of battle intensified. The station's shields were faltering, and Thurman could hear the hiss of atmosphere venting through newly formed breaches. Time was running out. With a grunt of effort, they wrenched the panel free. A tangle of fiber-optic cables and alien circuitry greeted them. Patel dove in, splicing wires with the desperate efficiency of a man who knew lives depended on his skills. "I think I've got it," Patel exclaimed. "A hard line to the docking bay. If the Endeavor's systems are still online." Thurman didn't wait. He punched in the emergency code, praying their ship's AI was still functional. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then a crackle of static and a familiar voice filled Thurman's earpiece. "Chancellor, this is Captain Watson. We're under heavy fire. What the hell is going on?" Thurman's relief was palpable, but short-lived. "Austin, listen carefully. The station's compromised. You need to break away and get a distress call out. It's our only chance." There was a pause, punctuated by the sound of weapons fire. "Understood, sir. But the Endeavor's not designed for this kind of combat. We'll be sitting ducks out there." Thurman's jaw clenched. He was asking Watson and his crew to sacrifice themselves for a slim chance at salvation. But what choice did they have? "You have to try, Captain, for all our sakes." Another pause. Then, "Aye, sir. It's been an honor." The connection cut out, leaving Thurman standing amid the chaos of the dying station. He turned to Rodriguez and Patel, their faces grim but determined. "Now we wait," Thurman said, his voice barely audible over the station's death throes. "And we hope." The Endeavor's engines roared to life as Captain Austin Watson guided the ship away from the Galactic Council's station. His hands flew over the controls, initiating evasive maneuvers even before the first enemy shots were fired. "Shields up! Weapons hot!" Watson barked to his crew. "This isn't going to be an easy ride, folks." The ship lurched as the first volley of enemy fire struck their shields. Watson gritted his teeth, pushing the Endeavor into a tight spiral to avoid the next barrage. "Status report," he called out. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Olivia Paulson, responded immediately. "Shields at 85% and holding, sir. We've got multiple bogies on our 6, closing fast." Watson's mind raced, considering their options. They needed to break through the enemy line and get clear of the jamming field to send their distress call. But with so many hostile ships in pursuit, that was easier said than done. "Divert auxiliary power to the engines," Watson ordered. "We need every ounce of speed we can get." The Endeavor surged forward, weaving through a field of debris from the initial attack on the station. Enemy ships gave chase, their energy weapons lighting up the void around them. Watson's hands danced over the controls, guiding the Endeavor through a series of maneuvers that pushed the ship to its limits. The hull groaned under the strain, but held together. "Sir," Paulson called out, "I'm detecting a gap in their formation at coordinates 227 Mark 35. It might be our best shot at breaking through." Watson nodded grimly. "Good eye, Lieutenant. Helm, set course for those coordinates. Full burn." The Endeavor's engines flared brilliantly as the ship accelerated towards the perceived weakness in the enemy line. For a moment, it seemed they might make it through unscathed. Then all hell broke loose. A previously cloaked enemy vessel materialized directly in their path. Watson's eyes widened in shock as he realized there was no time to alter course. "Brace for impact!" he shouted, even as his hands flew over the controls in a desperate attempt to minimize the collision. The Endeavor slammed into the enemy ship's shields at full speed. The human vessel's own shields flared and died, overwhelmed by the impact. Alarms blared throughout the ship as systems failed and hull breaches erupted across multiple decks. Watson was thrown from his chair, his head striking the helm console with brutal force. Stars exploded behind his eyes as he fought to remain conscious. "Damage report," he croaked, tasting blood in his mouth. Paulson's voice came through, strained and punctuated by coughing. "Multiple hull breaches, sir. Engines offline. Life support failing. We're dead in the water." Watson dragged himself back to his feet, ignoring the pain that lanced through his body. He stumbled to the communications array, desperate to complete their mission. "This is Captain Watson of the HSS Endeavour," he began, his voice hoarse. "We are under attack. Galactic Council Station compromised. Request immediate assistance." Static was his only reply. The long-range communications had been knocked out in the collision. Watson's mind raced. They had to find a way to get that message out. It was their sole mission, the reason they'd undertaken this desperate gambit in the first place. "Paulson," he called out, "I need options. How can we boost our signal strength?" The tactical officer's fingers flew over her console, searching for any solution. "Sir, our main transmitter is fried, but we might be able to repurpose the shield emitters. If we route all remaining power through them—" "Do it," Watson ordered without hesitation. "Divert everything we've got. Life support, artificial gravity, everything. We need that signal to punch through." As the crew scrambled to implement the plan, Watson turned his attention back to the viewport. The enemy ships were regrouping, preparing for what would likely be their final assault on the crippled Endeavour. "How long?" Watson asked, his eyes never leaving the approaching threat. 2 minutes, Paulson replied, her voice tight with concentration. "Maybe less." Watson nodded grimly. "It'll have to be enough. All hands, prepare for emergency protocols. We're going to lose gravity and atmosphere, but if this works, it'll all be worth it." The ship groaned around them as systems began to shut down. The artificial gravity was the first to go, sending loose objects floating through the air. Then came the hiss of escaping atmosphere as life support failed. Watson felt the pressure drop in his ears, knew they only had moments before the vacuum of space claimed them. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting that message out. 30 seconds, Paulson called out, her voice muffled by the emergency breather she'd donned. The enemy ships were almost upon them now. Watson could see energy weapons charging, knew that in moments the Endeavour would be turned into space debris. 15 seconds! Watson's lungs burned as he held his breath, the last of the ship's atmosphere gone. His vision began to blur, darkness creeping in at the edges. "Signal ready!" Paulson's triumphant shout cut through the haze in Watson's mind. With the last of his strength, Watson lunged for the transmit button. His fingers found it just as the first enemy salvo struck the Endeavour. The ship bucked and shuddered, hull plating tearing away under the assault. But in that moment, as the Endeavour began to break apart around them, the signal burst forth. Powered by every last ounce of energy the ship could muster, the distress call exploded outward. It tore through the enemy jamming field like it wasn't even there, racing out into the vastness of space. "This is the HSS Endeavour. We are under attack. Galactic Council Station compromised. Request immediate assistance. This is the HSS Endeavour." The message repeated over and over, each repetition another nail in the coffin of the enemy's plans. In the last moments before the ship's complete destruction, Watson managed to establish a final, fragmented communication link with the station. "Chancellor," his voice crackled through the static, weak but determined. "Message, sent, jamming, broken. We're not making it back. Good loot." The Endeavour's death throes were brief but violent. The ship broke apart under the relentless barrage, scattering debris across the starfield. Yet even as the last pieces of the once proud vessel drifted apart, its final message continued to race outward, a testament to the indomitable human spirit. Watson felt a smile tug at his lips as consciousness began to fade. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd gotten the message out. Now it was up to whoever received it to save the station and stop the attack. Even as the Endeavour was disintegrating under the assault, its final mission was accomplished. As darkness claimed him, Watson's last thoughts were of his crew, of their bravery and sacrifice. They'd given everything for this mission, and in doing so, they'd given the people on that station a fighting chance. On the station, Chancellor Thurman stood frozen, the weight of Watson's sacrifice pressing down on him like a physical force. The command center was eerily silent. the assembled delegates and crew members struggling to process what they had just heard. Watson's transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only static in its wake. Then, cutting through the shock and grief, a voice called out from the communication station. "Chancellor, we're picking up something. It's faint, but I think it's a distress signal." Thurman rushed to the console, hope warring with disbelief. There, barely audible through layers of static and interference, was the repeating message. "This is the HSS Endeavour. We are under attack. Galactic Council Station compromised. Request immediate assistance. This is the HSS Endeavour." Watson had done it. In his final act, he had managed to punch through the enemy's jamming field, sending out the crucial distress call that might just save them all. Thurman closed his eyes, a mix of emotions washing over him. Grief for the loss of Watson and his crew, pride in their incredible bravery and resourcefulness, and a glimmer of hope that their sacrifice might not have been in vain. Opening his eyes, Thurman turned to face the assembled delegates and crew members. Their faces showed a similar mix of shock, sorrow, and dawning hope. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thurman said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet command center, "Captain Watson and the crew of the Endeavour have given us a chance. A chance to survive, to fight back. We cannot, we will not, let their sacrifice be in vain." As if in response to his words, the station rocked under another barrage of enemy fire. The remaining attackers, enraged by the Endeavour's final act of defiance, were pressing their assault with renewed vigor. Thurman's jaw set in determination. They had to hold out, had to survive long enough for help to arrive. Watson and his crew had bought them this opportunity with their lives. Now it was up to them to make it count. "To your stations," Thurman ordered, his voice ringing with authority. "Divert all available power to shields and weapons. Prepare to repel boarders. We are not going down without a fight." As the command center erupted into a flurry of activity, Thurman spared one last thought for Watson and the crew of the Endeavour. Their bravery had given them a fighting chance, and he was determined not to waste it. In the end, that might just be enough to turn the tide. The distress signal from the HSS Endeavour pierced through the vast emptiness of space, racing towards the nearest human outpost. At Outpost Sigma 9, nestled in the outer reaches of human-controlled space, the message crackled to life in the communications center, shattering the routine monotony of the night shift. Lieutenant Commander Mario Albertini's eyes widened as he deciphered the fragmented transmission. His fingers flew across the console, enhancing and clarifying the signal. As the full import of the message became clear, he felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. "This is not a drill," he announced, his voice cutting through the low hum of the command center. "We have a priority 1 distress call from the Galactic Council Station. The HSS Endeavour reports they are under attack. All senior staff to the command center immediately." Alarms blared throughout the outpost as Albertini's words registered. Within minutes, the command center was a hive of activity as bleary-eyed officers rushed to their stations, the gravity of the situation evident on their faces. Admiral John Krena burst through the doors, his silver hair disheveled, but his eyes sharp and alert. "Report," he barked, striding to the central holographic display. Albertini quickly briefed him on the situation, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. "Sir, the Endeavour's message was cut off mid-transmission. We've lost all contact with the Council Station. Our long-range sensors are picking up signs of a major conflict in that sector." Krena's face hardened as he absorbed the information. He turned to his tactical officer, Commander Victor Magal. "What's our response time with available assets?" Magal's fingers danced across his terminal, running calculations. His frown deepened with each passing second. "Admiral, even if we scramble every ship in the sector, we're looking at a minimum of 6 hours before we can mount any kind of meaningful response. By then..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew that in 6 hours, the battle would be long over. The Galactic Council Station, along with Earth's diplomats and countless other species representatives, would be nothing more than space debris. A heavy silence fell over the command center. The weight of their helplessness pressed down on every officer present. They were humanity's first line of defense in this sector, and they were about to fail spectacularly. Krina's eyes swept across the room, taking in the defeated expressions of his crew. His mind raced, searching for options, for any possible way to turn the tide. And then, like a bolt of lightning, a memory struck him. "Project Phoenix," he whispered, his eyes widening with realization. Albertini looked at him, confusion evident on his face. "Sir?" Krina straightened, a new energy suffusing his movements. "Lieutenant Commander, clear the room. Command staff only. Security level Omega." As the junior officers filed out, their curiosity palpable, Krina turned to the remaining senior staff. His voice was low, urgent. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. Knowledge of its existence is punishable by life imprisonment." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Then, with a deep breath, he continued. 10 years ago, during our initial negotiations with the Galactic Council, Earth's leadership made a decision, a contingency plan, in case our new allies turned out to be less than friendly. Krina activated the central holographic display, inputting a series of complex codes. The image that sprang to life left the assembled officers speechless. A vast fleet of ships hung suspended in the hologram. But these weren't the sleek, advanced vessels of Earth's modern navy. These ships were older, bulkier, remnants of a bygone era of space warfare. "Gentlemen," Krina said, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and trepidation, "I give you the Phoenix fleet. Over 300 combat-ready vessels hidden in a nearby system, waiting for the day we might need them." The command staff stared at the hologram in disbelief. Commander Magel was the first to find his voice. "Admiral, with all due respect, these ships are obsolete. They're relics from the Martian Wars. How could they possibly help us now?" Krina's eyes gleamed with a fierce light. "Because, Commander, sometimes the oldest tricks are the best ones. Our enemies are expecting cutting-edge technology, shields calibrated against the latest weapons, tactics designed for modern warfare. They won't be prepared for this." He manipulated the hologram, zooming in on individual ship designs. "These vessels may be old, but they're far from toothless. Railguns capable of accelerating projectiles to a fraction of light speed. Armor plating that can shrug off hits that would vaporize our modern ships. And best of all, targeting systems that rely on good old-fashioned visual and infrared tracking, immune to the electronic warfare that cripples our newer vessels." As Krina spoke, the atmosphere in the command center began to shift. Despair gave way to cautious hope, then to growing excitement as the potential of the plan became clear. Lieutenant Commander Albertini leaned forward, his eyes alight with realization. "The enemy won't know how to counter them. Their sensors, their tactics, everything will be optimized for modern combat. These ships could punch right through their defenses." Krina nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Exactly, but there's more." He input another series of commands, and the hologram shifted to show a detailed schematic of the fleet's command structure. The majority of these ships can be operated remotely, with minimal crew. We have a small cadre of officers and technicians trained to use this older technology. They've been maintaining the fleet in secret, running drills, keeping everything in perfect working order. The implications of this revelation rippled through the room. They had a fleet. A massive, combat-ready fleet that could be deployed in a fraction of the time it would take to mobilize their regular forces. Commander Magel's tactical mind was already racing ahead. "Sir, if we can get this fleet into position, we could hit the enemy from an entirely unexpected angle. They'll be focused on the council station, never suspecting an attack from this sector." Krina nodded, his expression grave. "That's the plan, Commander. But make no mistake, this is a desperate gambit. We'll be throwing these ships and their crews into the teeth of an enemy fleet that's already proven capable of overwhelming the Council's defenses. Many of them won't come back. A somber silence fell over the room as the reality of what they were contemplating sank in. They were about to commit to a battle plan that would likely result in significant losses, but the alternative, standing by while the Galactic Council fell, was unthinkable. As Krina finished outlining the Phoenix Fleet's capabilities, a secure communication channel suddenly lit up on the main display. A young officer's face appeared, his eyes bright with determination. "Admiral Krina, this is Lieutenant Zahi Cullen from the Phoenix Fleet Maintenance Team. We've received your activation orders and are preparing the fleet for immediate deployment." Krina's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Lieutenant, I'm impressed by your quick response. What's your status?" Cullen's voice was steady as he replied, "Sir, our team has been running regular drills for years. We can have the entire fleet combat ready in less than 20 minutes. I'd like to volunteer to lead the primary strike force. I've been working with these ships since I joined the UED, and I know their systems intimately." The Admiral studied the young lieutenant's determined expression. After a moment, he nodded. "Very well, Lieutenant. You'll command the vanguard. Your mission will be to punch a hole in the enemy formation, create an opening for the rest of the fleet to exploit." As Cullen saluted, Krina addressed the rest of his staff with urgency. "No time to waste. Commander Magal, start formulating attack strategies immediately. Lieutenant Commander Albertini, secure a link with the Phoenix Fleet's command systems. I want those ships powered up and ready to deploy in 30 minutes. The command center erupted into a flurry of activity. Officers rushed to their stations, fingers flying over consoles as they began the monumental task of coordinating with the secret fleet and readying it for immediate action. Krina stood at the center of the storm, his mind already racing ahead to the battle to come. They were about to rewrite the book on interstellar warfare, using ships and tactics that hadn't seen action in generations. It was audacious, perhaps even foolhardy. But it was also the Galactic Council's only hope. As the minutes ticked by, reports began flooding in from across the system. Hidden hangar bays were opening, revealing rows upon rows of ships that had lain dormant for years. Fusion reactors that had been in standby mode for a decade roared to life, flooding the ancient vessels with power. In a secure bunker deep beneath the surface of a barren moon, Lieutenant Cullen and his team of technicians and officers sprang into action. They had trained for this moment for years, never truly believing it would come. Now, as klaxons blared and emergency lights bathed everything in a surreal red glow, they moved with practiced efficiency to bring their charges to life. Cullen stood before a wall of screens, each displaying the status of a different ship in his vanguard. He watched as system after system came online, a thrill of anticipation running through him. These ships might be old, but they were far from obsolete. In many ways, their simplicity was their greatest strength. Back in the command center, Admiral Krina watched as the impossible became reality before his eyes. Ship after ship reported ready status, their ancient systems humming with newfound purpose. It was a testament to human ingenuity and foresight, a trump card played at the 11th hour. But even as hope bloomed in his chest, Krina knew that the hardest part was yet to come. They had the fleet, but now they had to use it. They had to take these relics of a bygone era and turn them into the salvation of not just humanity, but the entire Galactic Council. This was why humanity had survived and thrived for so long. Not because they were the strongest or the most advanced, but because they never ever gave up. The Phoenix Fleet was awake, and it was angry. The Phoenix Fleet materialized at the edge of the Galactic Council's star system, a swarm of antiquated warships that seemed to emerge from the void itself. Lieutenant Zahi Cullen, at the helm of the vanguard ship Thunderchild, felt a mixture of anticipation and dread as the battlefield came into view on his tactical display. The scene before them was one of utter chaos. The Galactic Council station, once a beacon of interstellar cooperation, now hung in space like a wounded beast. Its once pristine hull was scarred and blackened, defensive systems flickering weakly against the relentless assault of the enemy fleet. Around it, the remnants of the Council's defense force fought a desperate holding action. Vastly outnumbered, and outgunned. Cullen's jaw clenched as he took in the dire situation. "All ships, battle formation Delta," he commanded, his voice steady, despite the gravity of the situation. "Remember your training. We're here to buy time and save lives." As one, the Phoenix fleet moved into action. Unlike the sleek, energy-shielded vessels of modern space combat, these ships were blunt instruments of war. Their hulls, thick slabs of titanium ceramic composite, were designed to withstand punishment that would cripple their more advanced counterparts. However, beneath their outdated exteriors lay the secret to their rapid deployment, a prototype gravimetric drive system, decades ahead of its time when first developed. This cutting-edge propulsion tech, long dismissed as too experimental for widespread use, allowed the ships to fold space in short bursts, cutting travel times to mere fractions of what was possible with conventional engines. To further protect against the strain of high-speed maneuvers, their hulls were reinforced with a lattice of carbon silicate microfibers, engineered to absorb and distribute kinetic energy during rapid transitions through space. While these ships lacked the finesse of modern vessels, their combination of brute strength and raw speed made them a formidable force, perfectly suited for the task ahead. "Thunderchild to all ships," Cullen broadcast. "Initiate Operation Buckshot. Weapons free. Focus on disrupting their formation." The response was immediate. Hundreds of railguns, relics of a bygone era of warfare, roared to life. They accelerated their projectiles to a fraction of light speed, unleashing a hail of hypersonic slugs that tore through the space between the fleets. The enemy, caught off guard by this unexpected reinforcement, scrambled to adjust their tactics. Their energy shields, calibrated for high-energy weapons, proved less effective against the brute force kinetic impacts. While not all shots found their mark, those that did caused significant damage, puncturing hulls and wreaking havoc on internal systems. Cullen watched with grim satisfaction as the first wave of enemy ships broke their formation, but he knew better than to celebrate prematurely. "All ships, execute evasive pattern Bravo," he ordered. The Phoenix fleet responded with a series of pre-programmed maneuvers. To an outside observer, it might have looked like a chaotic dance, but there was method in this madness. The erratic movements threw off the enemy's targeting systems, designed to predict the smooth, efficient trajectories of modern spacecraft. The enemy's return fire was devastating. Energy beams lanced out, seeking weak points in the Phoenix fleet's formation. Smart missiles corkscrewed through space, their AI pilots adjusting trajectories to exploit any gap in the defenses. Cullen's ship shuddered violently as an enemy salvo slammed into its starboard side, superheating a section of the hull to near melting point. Alarms blared, filling the bridge with a cacophony of warning lights and klaxons. A rupture in the titanium ceramic plating began to spread, threatening critical systems. But the Thunderchild, like all ships in the Phoenix fleet, had been designed for survival under the most brutal conditions. Layers of ablative armor absorbed the worst of the heat, buying precious seconds as plasma conduits rerouted power and automated countermeasures sprang into action. Damage control teams moved with practiced precision, sealing breaches with rapid hardening alloys and shunting power away from compromised systems. "Damage report!" Cullen barked, gripping the edge of his console to steady himself. "Primary shielding is down," his XO shouted over the chaos, "but backups are holding." Hull integrity at 62%, but stabilizing. The Thunderchild limped forward, her weapons still blazing as she targeted an enemy cruiser. Cullen watched the chaos unfold on the tactical display. All around him, Phoenix ships bore the brunt of the enemy assault, their thick, redundant designs enduring punishment that would have vaporized modern vessels. Yet, even as they fell, some consumed in spectacular fireballs, others spiraling lifelessly into the void. They exacted a deadly toll. For every Phoenix ship that was lost, an enemy vessel was either obliterated in return or crippled beyond repair. These ancient war machines, once thought obsolete, forced the enemy to burn through precious resources, exhausting their energy reserves and overwhelming their targeting systems. As the battle raged on, Cullen noticed something strange. The enemy's attacks, while still fierce, were becoming less coordinated. Their formation was breaking down, ships maneuvering individually rather than as part of a cohesive whole. Then it hit him. The Phoenix fleet's unconventional tactics weren't just confusing the enemy pilots, they were forcing their combat AI into uncharted territory. These artificial intelligences, programmed to exploit modern shielded vessels and energy weaponry, were struggling to respond to the antiquated but unpredictable tactics of the Phoenix fleet. Cullen saw his chance. "All ships, execute Operation Hornet's Nest," he commanded. The Phoenix fleet's formation adjusted immediately. Instead of a direct assault, the larger manned ships spread out into a wide arc, surrounding the Galactic Council station on 3 sides like a protective shield. Meanwhile, the unmanned drones launched a high-speed synchronized maneuver designed to create electromagnetic interference. The drones weren't armed for direct destruction. Instead, they emitted concentrated EMP pulses as they darted between enemy vessels. The pulses disrupted shield harmonics and scrambled the enemy's targeting systems, forcing their ships to rely on visual tracking, a severe disadvantage against the erratic maneuvers of the Phoenix fleet. "Deploy decoys," Cullen ordered. In response, small, reflective beacons launched from the Phoenix ships, mimicking the energy signatures of larger vessels. The enemy AI systems, overwhelmed by the cluttered battlefield and intermittent EMP bursts, began targeting the decoys instead of the real ships. It wasn't perfect, but every misfire bought the Phoenix fleet precious seconds to regroup and retaliate. "All railgun batteries, focus fire on their midline. Pinch them between our flanks," Cullen commanded. The railguns roared to life, their hypersonic projectiles tearing through the disoriented enemy ships. The staggered firing pattern created a pincer effect, driving the enemy vessels into an increasingly narrow corridor. Cullen's strategy wasn't about overwhelming firepower, it was about forcing the enemy into a kill zone where their superior numbers counted for less. Amid the chaos, the Phoenix fleet endured heavy losses. Cullen's tactical display flickered with warning lights as more ships reported critical damage. The Thunderchild rocked violently as an enemy beam grazed its port side, sending sparks flying across the bridge. "Shields are failing across multiple sectors," his XO shouted. "Drones are holding their attention, but they're adapting." Cullen nodded grimly. "That's expected. All ships prepare for Phase 2 of Hornet's Nest. Divert non-essential power to railguns and decoys. We hold this line no matter what." The drones continued to weave erratically through enemy ranks, their EMP bursts growing weaker as their power reserves dwindled. But they had done their job. The enemy's formation was fragmented, their heavy weapons firing blindly at decoys or into empty space. As the enemy fleet faltered, Cullen knew they had bought precious time for the Galactic Council station to recover its defenses. But the cost was high, and the battle was far from over. Above all, they needed a game-changer, and fast. "Tactical, give me an analysis of enemy ship movements," Cullen ordered, his eyes scanning the holographic display for any exploitable weakness. The tactical officer, Lieutenant Bruce Maju, worked furiously at his console, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Sir, I've isolated a timing flaw in their evasive maneuvers. Their AI prioritizes evasion over maintaining formation when facing simultaneous fire from multiple vectors." Cullen's eyes narrowed as the idea clicked into place. "If we coordinate our shots from overlapping angles, we can force them into a bottleneck," he said. His voice carried a new intensity. "Broadcast to all ships. Initiate sequence Omega. Target points of convergence and fire in staggered intervals. Let's box them in." The Phoenix fleet responded with precision born of endless drills and simulations. Mass drivers fired in a complex, interwoven pattern, not always aimed directly at enemy ships, but at specific points in space. The enemy vessels, their AI reacting automatically to the incoming fire, began to move in an increasingly predictable manner. Slowly but surely, the Phoenix fleet began to corral the enemy ships, pushing them into a tighter and tighter formation. It was a dangerous gambit. Concentrating the enemy's firepower could spell doom for the outdated human ships. But Cullen had one more trick up his sleeve. "All drone ships, prepare for mass detonation on my mark," he ordered. The swarm of unmanned vessels, which had been harassing the enemy's flanks, began to converge on the center of the enemy formation. The enemy commanders seemed to realize the trap too late. As their ships bunched together, trying to present a united front against the encircling Phoenix fleet, Cullen gave the order. "Now! All drones, detonate! All ships, unleash maximum kinetic cannon barrage!" The space at the heart of the enemy fleet erupted in a massive series of explosions as hundreds of drone ships self-destructed simultaneously. The shockwave rippled through the enemy formation, overloading shields and tearing apart hulls. In the same instant, every railgun in the Phoenix fleet opened fire, pouring a devastating barrage of kinetic rounds into the chaos. The effect was catastrophic for the enemy. Ships that had survived the initial blast were torn apart by the follow-up barrage. Those on the outskirts of the formation, their senses blinded by the explosion, fell easy prey to the Phoenix fleet's guns. For a moment, the battlefield was silent, save for the secondary explosions rippling through the remains of the enemy fleet. Then, slowly at first, but with growing volume, cheers began to erupt across the Phoenix fleet's communication channels. The enemy fleet, once seemingly invincible, was now in disarray, more than half of their ships destroyed or disabled. But the lieutenant knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The remaining enemy ships, while reduced in number, were still a formidable threat, and the Phoenix fleet had paid a heavy price for their success. Nearly a third of their ships were destroyed, with many more heavily damaged. "All ships, maintain battle formation," Cullen ordered, his voice cutting through the celebrations. "This isn't over yet. Damage report from all vessels and prepare for potential counterattack." As the reports began to flood in, Cullen turned his attention to the Galactic Council station. The massive structure, while still bearing the scars of the initial assault, seemed to have weathered the worst of the attack. Its defensive systems, bolstered by the unexpected arrival of the Phoenix fleet, were slowly coming back online. Suddenly, a burst of static crackled through the comms as Cullen opened a channel. "Thunderchild to Galactic Council Station," he broadcast. "What's your status? Do you require immediate assistance?" There was a moment of static before a reply came through. "Phoenix Fleet, this is Chancellor Thurman. Your arrival, your victory. It's nothing short of miraculous. We have wounded that need evacuation, and our life support systems are strained. But thanks to you, we're still here." Cullen nodded to himself. "Understood, Chancellor. We'll begin coordinating evacuation efforts immediately." As soon as the words left his mouth, the long-range sensors lit up with new signatures. The enemy, it seemed, had called for reinforcements. Cullen's mind raced, calculating their odds. The Phoenix fleet had bloodied the enemy's nose, but they were in no condition for another prolonged engagement. As Cullen's mind raced, calculating their odds against the incoming enemy reinforcements, a burst of static erupted from the communication console. The officer manning it, Lieutenant Howard Stern, frantically worked his controls, his eyes widening in surprise. "Sir, we're receiving multiple transmissions," he exclaimed. "Not just from UED, but it seems like everyone's responding to the counselor's distress calls. They're all coming." Cullen felt a surge of hope, but he knew they still had to survive long enough for help to arrive. "ETA on the closest reinforcements?" he asked, his voice tense. "UED ships will be here first, sir," Stern replied. "They were already en route. ETA, 15 minutes. Cullen nodded grimly. 15 minutes. We just need to hold out for 15 more minutes." He turned to address the fleet. "All ships, listen up. We've got friendlies inbound, but we need to buy them time. Every second we keep fighting is another life saved. Let's show these bastards what humanity is made of." The remnants of the Phoenix fleet rallied around his words. Damaged ships limped into defensive positions around the council station, while those still combat-capable formed a ragged line to meet the incoming enemy reinforcements. The enemy fleet emerged from hyperspace in a blaze of energy, their ships sleek and menacing against the backdrop of stars. They outnumbered the battered Phoenix fleet 3-1, their weapons already charging for the kill. But Cullen had one last trick up his sleeve. "All ships, initiate Operation Firefly," he commanded. Across the battlefield, the wrecks of destroyed Phoenix ships suddenly burst to life. Emergency power cells, secretly left active, powered up maneuvering thrusters. The dead ships began to move, guided by simple, pre-programmed routines. The enemy fleet faltered, their sensors struggling to differentiate between the active Phoenix ships and the moving wrecks. In that moment of confusion, Cullen struck. "All ships, maximum firepower, aim for their command vessels." The Phoenix fleet unleashed everything they had left. Railguns roared, missile pods emptied, and even point defense lasers joined the barrage. The enemy, caught off guard by the sudden attack and the swarm of moving wrecks, couldn't coordinate their defenses fast enough. Two of their largest ships erupted in massive explosions, their reactors going critical. The loss of their command vessels threw the enemy into disarray, their formation breaking apart as individual captains tried to take charge. But even as the Phoenix fleet pressed their advantage, Cullen knew it wouldn't be enough. His ships were running on fumes, their weapons nearly depleted. The enemy, despite their losses, still outnumbered and outgunned them. Just as it seemed the Phoenix fleet had reached its limit, space lit up with new energy signatures. A massive hyperspace window tore open, and out poured the sleek, powerful ships of the UED fleet. "This is Admiral Susan Brown of the UED," a stern voice crackled over the comms. "Phoenix fleet, you've done enough. Fall back and regroup. We'll take it from here." Cullen breathed a sigh of relief as he ordered his ships to withdraw. The UED fleet engaged the enemy with devastating efficiency, their advanced weapons tearing through the already battered hostile forces. As the UED fleet turned the tide of battle, Cullen received another transmission. It was from the human space station that had activated the Phoenix fleet. "Lieutenant Cullen, this is Commander Krina. We've re-established communication. Well done out there. Your actions have saved countless lives and potentially prevented a galactic war. The Phoenix fleet has lived up to its name." Cullen allowed himself a small smile. "Thank you, Commander. We couldn't have done it without your strategy and foresight. The Phoenix fleet stands ready for further orders." As the battle continued to rage, more hyperspace windows began to open. Ships from a dozen different species poured out. The Arcturian Collective, the Jotrak Imperium, even the notoriously isolationist Halexian technocracy. They had all answered the Council's call for aid, arriving sometime after the UED fleet due to the delay in receiving the distress signals. What had been a desperate last stand transformed into an overwhelming victory. Caught between multiple fleets, and with no hope of victory, the remaining enemy ships began to surrender or flee. As the last enemy vessel disappeared into hyperspace, a stunned silence fell over the battlefield. Then, gradually, cheers and cries of relief filled the communication channels. The Council station, so recently on the brink of destruction, now floated serenely amidst a protective ring of Allied ships. On board the station, Chancellor Thurman and the other Council members emerged from their emergency bunkers. They gathered in the main observation deck, staring out at the aftermath of the battle with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "I can't believe it," Shinta, the Arcturian representative, whispered. "We were so close to annihilation, and yet here we stand," Thurman finished, his voice filled with quiet pride. "Thanks to the bravery of the Phoenix fleet." As if summoned by his words, a battered ship limped into view. The Thunderchild, scorched and scarred but still intact, maneuvered alongside the station. A docking tube extended, and moments later, Lieutenant Cullen stepped onto the observation deck. He saluted sharply, his uniform singed and torn, but his bearing immaculate. "Chancellor, Councilors, Lieutenant Zahi Cullen of the Phoenix Fleet, reporting mission accomplished." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, to everyone's surprise, Gakara, the usually stoic Jotrak representative, burst into laughter. "Mission accomplished," he says. "Young man, you and your fleet have saved the entire Council. You've likely prevented a galactic war." Mission accomplished doesn't begin to cover it. Thurman stepped forward, extending his hand to Cullen. Lieutenant, on behalf of humanity and the entire Galactic Council, I thank you. Your actions today will be remembered for generations to come. As Cullen shook the Chancellor's hand, he couldn't help but smile. Thank you, sir. But I was just doing my duty. Every member of the Phoenix Fleet fought with everything they had. Indeed they did, Counselor Larissa, the Halexian representative, interjected. Her cybernetic eyes whirred softly as they focused on Cullen. But I must ask, those ships of yours, they're unlike anything I've seen before. By most standards, they should have been relics of history, yet you turned them into weapons of precision and resilience. It's not just their design that's remarkable. It's the philosophy behind them. While most species, including my own, dismiss what's outdated, humanity seems to see potential in what others abandon. That is an uncommon strength. Cullen exchanged a glance with Thurman, who nodded slightly. The Phoenix Fleet, Counselor, was a contingency plan. A fleet of older ships, kept in reserve and constantly maintained, just in case we ever faced a situation where our more advanced vessels were neutralized or unavailable. Ingenious, Shinta murmured. To think of keeping such outdated technology functional, let alone combat-ready. That's humanity for you, Thurman said with a hint of pride. We have a saying, never put all your eggs in one basket. The Phoenix Fleet was our insurance policy, a backup plan we hoped we'd never need to use. The counselors exchanged thoughtful looks. It was clear that humanity had risen significantly in their estimation. Well, Gakara rumbled, I believe this calls for a celebration, not just of our victory, but of the foresight and bravery that made it possible. As the counselors began to discuss plans for a formal ceremony, Cullen felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Admiral Brown, her expression a mix of pride and amusement. Nice work, Lieutenant, she said quietly. Though I have to say, you've made my job a lot more interesting. Every species out there is going to be clamoring for information about the Phoenix Fleet now. Cullen winced. Sorry about that, Admiral. We didn't exactly have time for subtlety. Brown waved off his apology. Don't be. You did what you had to do, and you saved a lot of lives in the process. Besides, she added with a wry smile, it's about time the galaxy remembered that humanity isn't just about flashy tech and diplomacy. Sometimes, good old-fashioned grit and ingenuity are what save the day. As the Admiral moved off to join the counselors, Cullen found himself alone for a moment. He turned to the observation window, his gaze falling on the battered yet triumphant Phoenix Fleet, now flanked by the sleek, advanced ships of their allies. A quiet pride stirred within him, not for himself but for the crew who had fought with unyielding courage and sacrificed so much. Together, they had shown the galaxy a profound truth. Determination and unity could overcome even the direst odds. As Cullen stood there, he made a silent vow. They would continue to fight, not just for survival, but for their allies and the hope of a lasting peace. Hey there again. I'm glad you've come so far. Hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button. This is really important to the channel. Really important.